She arrived at the school on a quiet morning when most students were already settled into their routines. The hallway was filled with familiar voices, laughter, and the usual noise of friends catching up. But she walked through it like a shadow, unnoticed and silent. Her steps were careful, almost as if she didn't want to disturb anything around her. The office had already informed the teachers about a new student joining mid-year. Transfers like this were not unusual, but they always came with questions. Why now? What happened before? Still, no one asked her directly. When she entered the classroom for the first time, every pair of eyes turned toward her, just for a moment. Some curious, some uninterested, some already forming quiet judgments. She stood near the door until the teacher pointed her toward an empty seat near the back. She nodded slightly and walked there without saying a word. No introduction, no attempt to explain herself. Just silence. From that moment, she became the quiet one. Days passed and nothing about her changed. She spoke only when necessary, and even then, her voice was soft and brief. She didn't join group conversations or laugh at jokes. During breaks, while others gathered in small circles, she preferred to sit alone, sometimes looking out the window, sometimes just staring at nothing. Some students thought she was shy. Others thought she was strange. A few didn't think about her at all. Her teachers noticed too. They tried small things at first, simple questions, gentle encouragement, but she never gave more than the minimum. It wasn't that she was rude. It was more like she had built a quiet wall around herself, and no one knew how to step through it. In most subjects, she performed normally. Not the best, not the worst. Just enough to avoid attention. Her work was neat, her answers were correct, but there was nothing that stood out. It was as if she had learned how to stay invisible. Then there was music class. The music room was one of the liveliest places in the school. It was filled with sound, energy, and movement. Some students loved it because it gave them a chance to express themselves. Others enjoyed it because it was less strict than other classes. But for her, it was different. The first time she walked into the music room, something in her expression changed for a brief second. It was so quick that no one really noticed. Her eyes paused on the piano in the corner of the room. It was old but well cared for, its surface slightly worn from years of use. She looked at it longer than anything else in that room. Then, just as quickly, she looked away and took her seat. The teacher was energetic and passionate about music. They believed every student had some kind of talent, even if it needed time to grow. So naturally, they tried to involve her like everyone else. "Would you like to try?" the teacher asked one day, pointing toward the piano after a simple demonstration. She shook her head immediately. It wasn't a dramatic refusal, just a small, quiet movement. The teacher smiled and didn't push further at that moment. They assumed it was just nervousness. Many students were afraid of performing in front of others. But what they didn't know was that her refusal wasn't about fear of people. It was about something deeper. As the weeks went by, music class continued like usual. Students took turns playing simple tunes, some making mistakes, others improving slowly. The room was filled with laughter whenever someone hit the wrong note or lost their rhythm. She never volunteered. She never even showed interest. If anything, she seemed to withdraw even more during those moments. While others gathered around the piano, she stayed in her seat, her eyes lowered, her hands resting quietly on her desk. But sometimes, when no one was looking, her fingers would move slightly, as if they were remembering something. One afternoon, the class ended earlier than usual. Most students rushed out quickly, excited for the break. The room emptied within minutes, leaving behind a rare moment of silence. She was one of the last to stand. For a second, she hesitated. Her eyes slowly turned toward the piano again. The room was quiet. No voices, no laughter, no pressure. Just her and that instrument. She took a small step forward, then another. It felt like something was pulling her closer, something she had been trying to ignore for a long time. But just as she reached the middle of the room, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Someone was coming back. She stopped instantly. The moment broke. Without thinking twice, she turned around and walked out, leaving the piano untouched. The next day, nothing seemed different. She returned to her usual seat, her usual silence. If anyone had seen that moment, they might have noticed the hesitation in her steps. But no one had. Her teachers continued to observe her. They couldn't quite understand her. She wasn't struggling, but she wasn't trying either. It was like she was holding something back. During a staff discussion, her music teacher mentioned her briefly. "She doesn't participate at all," they said. "It's like she's not interested in music." Another teacher shrugged. "Some students are like that. Maybe she just doesn't have the skill." That assumption settled quietly in the room. Not talented, not interested, just another student who would pass through without leaving a mark. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was hidden in small details no one paid attention to, like how she always chose a seat where she could see the piano clearly, or how her fingers sometimes moved in perfect rhythm without any sound, or how her eyes changed for just a second whenever music filled the room. There was something there, something practiced, something controlled, but she kept it locked away. At home, her life was just as quiet. She didn't talk much there either. The walls of her room were plain, almost empty. No decorations, no signs of hobbies or interests, except for one thing. In the corner of her room, covered with a cloth, was a small keyboard. It wasn't new. Some keys were slightly worn, and a few had lost their shine. But it was still functional. That night, long after everything else had gone quiet, she pulled the cloth away. For a moment, she just sat there, staring at it. Her hands rested on her lap, unmoving. It wasn't hesitation this time. It was memory. Slowly, she placed her fingers on the keys. The first note she played was soft, almost uncertain. It echoed quietly in the room, like a whisper. Then came another, and another. Within seconds, something changed. Her posture straightened. Her fingers began to move with confidence, with precision. The hesitation disappeared completely. What came out wasn't random. It wasn't beginner level. It was controlled, emotional, and deeply practiced. Her hands moved across the keys as if they had done this 1,000 times before. Every note connected smoothly to the next. There was no pause, no confusion. It was like watching someone who belonged there, but there was no audience, no applause, no one to see what she could really do. She played for a while, then suddenly stopped. The room fell silent again. Her expression changed, the confidence fading as quickly as it had appeared. She looked down at her hands, then slowly pulled them away from the keyboard. Without a word, she covered it again. The silence returned, just like before. The next morning, she walked into school the same way she always did. Quiet, careful, unnoticed. No one knew what she had done the night before. No one knew what she was capable of. To everyone else, she was still just the quiet girl in the corner. And that was exactly how she wanted it. For now. The announcement came on a normal morning, the kind where nothing feels different until something suddenly is. Students were settling into their seats, some still talking, others half asleep. When the teacher walked in with a slight smile that immediately caught attention, there was something planned. Next month, the teacher began, writing a date on the board. "We will have a music showcase." The room reacted instantly. Some students lit up with excitement, already whispering about what they might play. Others groaned quietly, not thrilled about performing in front of people. It was the usual mix of reactions. But then came the part no one expected. This time, everyone will participate. The room fell quieter. A few students laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. But the teacher didn't smile. "No exceptions," they added gently. "Each of you will prepare a piece and perform it." That changed everything. Now even the confident ones looked a little unsure. Performing by choice was one thing. Being required to do it was different. In the back of the room, she sat completely still. Her eyes stayed on her desk, but her fingers tightened slightly. She had hoped to stay invisible in this class, just like everywhere else. But now that was no longer possible. The teacher continued explaining the details. Students would be given time to practice during class, and they could choose their own piece, or be assigned one if they couldn't decide. Names were written down. Ideas were shared. The room slowly filled with energy again. But she said nothing. When her turn came to speak, the teacher looked at her with a patient expression. "Have you thought about what you'd like to play?" She shook her head. "Would you like something simple to start with?" Another small shake. It wasn't clear whether she was refusing or just unsure. The teacher paused for a moment, studying her. From what they had seen so far, she hadn't shown any interest in music at all. No volunteering, no curiosity, nothing. So they made an assumption. "All right," the teacher said, picking up a sheet from their desk. "I'll assign something to you." She didn't react. The paper was placed in front of her. "This is a bit more challenging," the teacher added, "but it will help you grow." Some nearby students glanced over, curious. One of them raised an eyebrow slightly. A difficult piece? For her? It didn't make sense. She slowly looked down at the paper. The notes spread across the page weren't simple. They were layered, detailed, and clearly meant for someone with experience. For a moment, her eyes didn't move. Then she gave a small nod. No complaints. No questions. Just acceptance. That surprised the teacher. "Good," they said with a small smile. "We'll start practicing tomorrow." As the class continued, quiet whispers began to spread. "Did you see what she got? She can barely play, right? Why would they give her something like that?" The comments weren't loud, but they were enough. She heard them. Of course she did. But she didn't react. She never did. The next day, practice began. The music room felt different now. There was a sense of purpose in the air. Each student had something to work toward, something to prepare. The teacher moved around the room, helping one student after another. Some struggled with basic notes, others worked on improving their timing. When it was her turn, the teacher stood beside her, pointing at the sheet. "Let's start slowly," they said. "Just the first few lines." She nodded. Her hands hovered above the keys. For a brief second, it looked like she might begin. But then she placed her fingers down carefully and pressed the first note. It was correct. Then the second. Also correct. But something felt off. She played slowly, almost too slowly. There was no flow, no connection between the notes. It sounded like someone reading each note individually, without understanding the piece as a whole. The teacher watched closely. "Take your time," they encouraged. "Don't rush." She continued like that, stopping often, starting again, making small mistakes here and there. It was exactly what they expected from someone inexperienced. Nothing more. After a few minutes, the teacher nodded. "That's okay for now," they said. "We'll keep working on it." She pulled her hands back slightly and gave a small nod. From the outside, it looked like she was struggling. And that's exactly what she allowed them to see. Over the next few days, the same pattern continued. During class, she played carefully, slowly, making just enough mistakes to match everyone's expectations. She never improved too quickly, never showed too much. The teacher grew a little concerned. Maybe the piece was too difficult after all. One afternoon, they approached her again. "If it feels too hard," they said gently, "we can choose something easier." She shook her head immediately. It was the first time she reacted that quickly. The teacher noticed. "You want to keep this one?" they asked. She nodded. There was something different in that small movement. Something firm. "All right," the teacher said, slightly surprised. "Then we'll keep going." Around her, classmates continued their own practice. Some were improving, others still struggling. But many of them had already formed their opinions about her. "She's not ready. This is going to be embarrassing. Why didn't she just pick something simple?" They didn't mean to be cruel. It was just how things worked. People judged what they saw. And what they saw was a quiet girl struggling with a difficult piece. Nothing more. But what they didn't see was what happened after school. That same evening, she returned home quietly, just like always. No conversations, no distractions. Her room was waiting, unchanged. She closed the door behind her and stood still for a moment. Then she walked to the corner and uncovered the keyboard again. This time, there was no hesitation. The moment her fingers touched the keys, everything changed. The same piece she struggled with at school flowed smoothly under her hands. The notes connected effortlessly, forming something rich and powerful. There were no pauses, no mistakes, no uncertainty. Her fingers moved with speed and control, shifting across the keys as if the music lived inside her. It wasn't just correct. It was expressive. Every note carried feeling. Every movement had purpose. It was the kind of playing that made people stop and listen. But again, there was no one there, just her. And the music she refused to show the world. She played longer this time, going through the piece again and again, each time with more depth. Then suddenly she stopped. Her breathing slowed. The room returned to silence. For a moment, she just sat there, her hands still resting near the keys. Then slowly, she pulled them back. Her expression softened, but there was something heavy behind it. Something she didn't let out. She covered the keyboard again. The next day at school, everything continued as if nothing had changed. She returned to her seat. She played slowly. She made small mistakes. She stayed quiet. And everyone believed exactly what they saw. The teacher, though, began to feel something wasn't quite right. They couldn't explain it clearly. It was just a feeling. There were moments, very small ones, when her fingers moved too naturally before she corrected herself. Moments when she seemed to know exactly what to do, but chose not to. It was easy to miss, but it was there. Still, without proof, it remained just a thought. So the days continued. Practice, mistakes, silence. The showcase was getting closer, and no one, not the teacher, not the students, had any idea what was really coming, except her, and she wasn't saying a word. The days started to move faster as the showcase came closer. What once felt like something far away was now becoming real. The date written on the board was no longer just a reminder. It was getting closer with each passing morning. In the music room, the energy had changed. Students were more focused now. The laughing and casual playing had slowly turned into serious practice. Everyone wanted to do well. No one wanted to stand on stage and fail in front of others. She noticed all of it even though she didn't show it. She continued sitting in the same place, hands resting quietly until it was her turn. And when it was, she played the same way she always did, slow, careful, slightly unsure. The teacher still guided her patiently. "Try again from here," they would say, pointing at the sheet. She would nod and begin again, pressing each key like she was still learning where they were. To anyone watching, it looked like she was improving very slowly. But something felt different now. The teacher couldn't ignore it anymore. There were small moments, very small, when her hands moved too quickly before she corrected herself. Moments when her timing was perfect for just a second, then suddenly became uneven again. It was strange. One afternoon, the teacher stood beside her longer than usual. "Play this part again," they said softly. She did. The same slow pace, the same careful mistakes. But just as she moved into the next line, her fingers shifted faster. Clean, smooth, exact. It lasted less than a second. Then she went back to playing slowly. The teacher blinked. "Wait," they said gently. "Play that again." She paused, then nodded. This time she didn't repeat that moment. Everything stayed slow and unsure. The teacher stepped back slightly, confused. Maybe they imagined it. Maybe it was just luck. Still, the feeling stayed in their mind. Something didn't add up. But without anything clear, they said nothing more. Class ended like always. Students packed their things and rushed out, talking about their pieces, their progress, their nerves. She moved slower than the others. She always did. When the room emptied, she stayed behind for a few seconds longer than usual. Her eyes moved toward the piano. The same quiet pull. The same silent connection. But just like before, she didn't go near it. Instead, she picked up her bag and walked out. Later that evening, the school building was nearly empty. The sun had already started to set, leaving the hallways dim and quiet. A staff member was moving through the building, finishing small tasks before locking up for the day. It was a routine they had followed for years. Most days were the same, quiet, predictable. But that evening was different. As they passed near the music room, they heard something. Piano music. At first they paused, unsure. The showcase was coming, so maybe a student had stayed behind to practice. That wasn't unusual. But this didn't sound like normal practice. The notes were smooth, flowing together without effort. The rhythm was steady, the emotion clear. It wasn't hesitant or broken like most student rehearsals. It sounded complete. Careful and curious, they moved closer to the door. The music grew clearer. Whoever was playing knew exactly what they were doing. There were no mistakes, no pauses, just confidence. The staff member gently pushed the door open, just enough to look inside. And there she was, sitting at the piano, alone. Her posture was straight, her hands moving across the keys with ease. Her eyes weren't on the sheet in front of her. They were slightly lowered, focused, as if she didn't need to look at anything at all. She wasn't just playing the piece. She was feeling it. Every note carried something deeper, something that couldn't be taught in a classroom. It was the same girl who sat quietly every day, the same one who struggled during class. But right now, she was completely different. The staff member stood still, not wanting to interrupt. They watched in silence, trying to understand what they were seeing. This wasn't beginner level. This wasn't even average. This was something far beyond. After a few minutes, the piece ended. Her hands slowly lifted from the keys. The last note faded into the empty room. She sat still for a moment, breathing softly. Then, as if a switch had been turned off, her shoulders relaxed. The intensity disappeared from her face. She became the quiet girl again. She reached for her bag, stood up, and turned toward the door. That's when she noticed someone was there. For a brief second, their eyes met. There was no panic in her expression, no fear, just a quiet awareness. The staff member stepped back slightly, surprised. I didn't mean to disturb you, they said gently. She didn't respond. She just stood there, waiting. They paused, searching for the right word. That was very good. She lowered her eyes slightly. Still no reply. Have you been practicing here often? They asked. She shook her head. A small, simple movement. The staff member studied her for a moment. There were many questions they could ask. Why was she hiding this? Why did she pretend not to know how to play? But something about her quiet presence made those questions feel too heavy. So instead, they just nodded. Well, the room will be locked soon, they said softly. You should head home. She gave a small nod in return. No explanation, no excuse. She simply walked past them and left the room. The staff member remained there for a few seconds, still thinking about what they had just seen. It didn't make sense, but it was real. The next day, everything looked normal again. She returned to her seat. She played slowly. She made small mistakes. Nothing had changed on the surface. But now, at least one person knew the truth, and they couldn't unsee it. During class, the teacher continued guiding students as usual. They still had that small doubt in their mind, but without clear proof, it remained just a feeling. Meanwhile, the staff member watched quietly from a distance whenever they passed by. They didn't say anything. They didn't interrupt. They just observed. And every time they saw her in class, pretending to struggle, it felt even more surprising. Why would someone hide something like that? The showcase was now very close. Only a short time remained. Students were becoming more nervous, more focused. Some stayed after school to practice. Others asked for extra help. But she didn't ask for anything. She didn't stay in the open. She didn't show anyone what she could really do. She kept it hidden, locked away, as if it was never meant to be seen. But the truth had already started to surface, even if only a little, and it wouldn't stay hidden forever. The days before the showcase felt heavier than usual. It wasn't just another school activity anymore. It had turned into something everyone was thinking about, talking about, even worrying about. Posters had been placed in the hallways, reminding students of the upcoming event. Teachers mentioned it in class. Some students were excited, imagining applause and attention. Others felt nervous, trying not to think about standing alone on a stage. She noticed all of it, even though she stayed quiet like always. In music class, practice became more serious. The teacher no longer treated it as casual learning. Every mistake was corrected more carefully. Every student was given extra time to improve. When it was her turn, the same routine continued. She sat at the piano, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play slowly, careful, uncertain, making small mistakes at just the right moments. From the outside, nothing had changed, but the teacher's patience had started to shift into concern. One afternoon, after she finished a rough attempt, the teacher gently closed the music sheet. "Let's talk for a moment," they said. She looked up, slightly surprised, but didn't speak. "This piece," the teacher continued, "is not easy. I may have given you something too difficult." She stayed silent. "You still have time to switch to something simpler," they added. "It's okay if this one isn't working." For a second, the room felt very still. Then she shook her head. It wasn't rushed or unsure. It was firm. The teacher paused. "You're sure?" She nodded. There was something in her eyes this time. Not fear. Not confusion. Something quiet, but strong. The teacher noticed it. And for the first time, they hesitated to say more. "All right," they said slowly. "Then we'll keep going." But as she returned to her seat, the teacher couldn't ignore the feeling building inside them. Something about her didn't match what they were seeing. And they weren't the only ones starting to notice things. The staff member who had seen her play alone had kept that moment to themselves. They hadn't told anyone, not even the teacher. It didn't feel right to share something that clearly wasn't meant to be seen. But it stayed in their mind. Every time they passed the music room, they would pause just for a second, listening. Sometimes there was nothing. Sometimes there were students practicing. But a few times late in the day, they heard it again. The same smooth, controlled playing. The same quiet power. And each time it was her. Always alone. Always hidden. Meanwhile, in class, whispers among students had started to grow. "She's still not ready. This is going to be awkward to watch. Why doesn't she just stop?" They didn't say it loudly, but they said it enough. She heard them. Of course she did. But her reaction never changed. She stayed quiet. Still. Focused. But inside, things were not as calm as they looked. Every time she sat in front of the piano during class and forced herself to play slowly, it felt like holding something back that wanted to come out. Her hands knew what to do. They remembered everything. But she stopped them. Again and again. It wasn't just about hiding. It was about control. Because every note she truly played brought something with it. Memories. Feelings she wasn't ready to face. That night, at home, the room felt quieter than usual. She sat on her bed for a long time without moving. The covered keyboard in the corner seemed heavier than before, even though it hadn't changed. Slowly, she stood up and walked toward it. Her steps were slower this time, more careful. When she pulled the cloth away, she didn't sit immediately. She just stood there, looking at it, as if deciding something. Finally, she sat down. Her fingers rested on the keys, but they didn't move. Not yet. Her mind drifted. Back to a time when music wasn't something she had to hide. Back to a place where playing the piano wasn't done in silence. There had been someone there once. Someone who sat beside her, guiding her hands, correcting her posture, encouraging her to feel the music, not just play it. The lessons had been strict, but never cold. There had been warmth, expectation, belief. She could almost hear the voice again, calm but firm, telling her to try again, to listen carefully, to understand every note. Then that memory shifted. The room in her mind changed. The piano was still there, but the voice was gone. The silence that followed had stayed with her ever since. Her fingers pressed down on the keys suddenly. The first note rang out, stronger than usual. Then another, and another. Within seconds, she was playing again. But this time, it felt different. It wasn't just smooth or controlled. It carried something heavier. Every note felt deeper, almost like it was pulling something out of her. Her movements became faster, more intense. The music filled the room, louder than before. It wasn't just practice anymore. It was release. Her expression changed. her focus sharp, her breathing uneven. Then suddenly, she stopped. Her hands froze above the keys. The silence returned instantly. Her chest rose and fell quickly as if she had been running. She looked down at the keyboard, then slowly pulled her hands away. Her eyes softened, but there was a quiet pain behind them. She covered the keyboard again, but this time her movements were slower, more careful, as if she was putting something away that wasn't ready to be seen. The next day at school, the final week before the showcase began. The tension was clear now. Students were nervous, even the confident ones. During music class, the teacher made an announcement. "We will have a full rehearsal soon," they said. "Each of you will perform your piece as if it's the real event." The room reacted immediately. Some students looked excited. Others looked worried. This was serious now. When her turn came during practice, the teacher watched her closely. More closely than before. She began playing the same way. Slow, careful, uncertain. But this time, the teacher didn't look away. They watched her hands. Every movement, every pause. And there it was again. That small moment. That brief second where her fingers moved perfectly before slowing down again. The teacher's eyes narrowed slightly. They didn't stop her. They didn't say anything. But the doubt in their mind was growing stronger. After class, as students left, the teacher stood still for a moment, thinking something wasn't right. And now, they were starting to believe it wasn't just a feeling. The showcase was almost here. The pressure was building. The truth was getting closer to the surface. And whether she wanted it or not, it wouldn't stay hidden much longer. The day of the showcase arrived faster than anyone expected. What had once felt distant was now right in front of them. The school looked different that morning. Chairs were being arranged in the hall, a small stage had been prepared, and the piano had been moved to the center where everyone could see it clearly. Students walked in with mixed emotions. Some were excited, trying to hide their nervous energy behind smiles and jokes. Others were quiet, going over their pieces again and again in their minds. Even the teachers seemed more focused than usual. She arrived like she always did. Quiet, unnoticed, and calm on the outside. But inside, things were not calm. Her steps were slower as she walked past the hall. For a brief moment, she looked at the stage. The piano stood there under soft light, waiting. She quickly looked away and continued walking. Backstage, students gathered in small groups. Some whispered their pieces one last time, tapping their fingers against their legs as if practicing on invisible keys. Others sat quietly, eyes closed, trying to steady their breathing. She stood slightly apart from everyone. No conversation, no preparation in front of others. Just silence. The music teacher moved between students, offering encouragement. Take your time. Don't rush. Just do your best. When they reached her, they paused for a moment. You'll be okay, they said gently. She gave a small nod. But the teacher didn't move right away this time. They looked at her more carefully, as if trying to read something they still didn't fully understand. Then finally, they stepped away. The program began. One by one, students were called onto the stage. The first performance was simple, careful, and a little shaky. The audience responded kindly, offering polite applause. The next student did better, more confident, with fewer mistakes. As each performance passed, the room slowly filled with a rhythm of sound and reaction. Music followed by claps, nerves followed by relief. Backstage, she listened. Each piece, each mistake, each moment. Her hands rested quietly at her sides, but her fingers moved slightly, almost unconsciously, matching the rhythm of what she heard. The closer her turn came, the quieter everything inside her felt. Not calm, just still. When her name was finally called, there was a small pause. A few students in the audience glanced at each other. Some remembered her from class. The quiet girl, the one who struggled. She walked onto the stage slowly. Each step felt clear and steady. No rushing, no hesitation. She reached the piano and sat down. The hall was quiet, not completely silent, but quiet enough that every small movement could be heard. The soft sound of the bench, the slight shift of her hands, the faint echo of her breath. From the audience, nothing about her looked special. She didn't look confident. She didn't look prepared. She just looked quiet. The teacher watched closely from the side, closer than they had watched any other student, because something inside them still didn't feel right. She placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, she didn't move. The silence stretched just a little longer than expected. A few students shifted in their seats. Someone whispered. Then, the first note. It was soft, careful, just like before. The second note followed. Then the third. At first, it sounded exactly how everyone expected. Slow, uncertain, almost like she might stop at any second. A few people in the audience lowered their expectations immediately. Some looked away. Some prepared themselves for an awkward performance. But then, something changed. It didn't happen all at once. It was small, subtle. Her hands moved just a little more freely. The pauses between notes became shorter. The sound became smoother. Then suddenly, everything shifted. The hesitation disappeared. Her fingers moved across the keys with speed and control that no one had seen before. The music transformed completely. What started as something fragile became something strong, full, and alive. The notes flowed together perfectly, building into something powerful. The room changed. People who had looked away turned back instantly. Whispers stopped. Every eye moved toward the stage. The teacher froze. This wasn't the same playing they had seen in class. Not even close. This was something else entirely. Her posture straightened slightly as she played. Her movements confident, precise. She wasn't looking at the sheet anymore. She didn't need to. The piece lived in her hands. Every part of it. Every detail. Every emotion. The sound filled the hall, reaching every corner, holding every person in place. There were no mistakes, no hesitation, only control, only feeling. The audience sat completely still. No shifting, no whispering, just listening. Backstage, students who were waiting for their turn forgot their own nerves. They stood quietly, drawn toward the sound coming from the stage. No one expected this. No one. The teacher slowly took a step forward, their eyes fixed on her hands. Now they understood. All those small moments, all those brief seconds. It had never been a mistake. She had been holding back. The staff member who had seen her before stood near the back of the hall. They weren't surprised, but even they felt the weight of the moment, because this time she wasn't holding anything back. The music grew stronger, reaching its highest point. Her fingers moved faster now, but still controlled, still exact. Then, just as smoothly as it had built, the piece began to soften. The final notes approached. Gentle, clear, precise. And then, silence. Her hands lifted slowly from the keys. The last note faded into the room. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if the sound was still there, even though it had ended. Then, applause. Loud, sudden, uncontrolled. It filled the hall, stronger than for any performance before. People stood up. Not everyone, but enough that it spread quickly. The teacher clapped, still in shock. Students looked at each other, disbelief written clearly on their faces. Some of the same ones who had doubted her now stared at the stage, unable to say anything. She sat there for a second longer, as if the sound of the applause hadn't fully reached her yet. Then she stood. She didn't smile. She didn't bow dramatically. She just gave a small, quiet nod and stepped away from the piano. The applause followed her as she walked off the stage. Backstage, the atmosphere had completely changed. The same students who had ignored her now moved aside as she passed. No one spoke right away. They didn't know what to say. The teacher approached her slowly. There were so many questions. But for a moment they said nothing. They just looked at her. Finally, one simple sentence came out. That was incredible. She lowered her eyes slightly. Still quiet. Still the same on the outside. But everything had changed. Because now, everyone knew. The sound of applause didn't fade quickly. It stayed in the hall even after she had stepped off the stage. Students were still clapping, some standing, some looking around as if they had just witnessed something they couldn't fully understand. Backstage, the air felt different now. Before, it had been filled with nerves and quiet practice. Now, it carried surprise, curiosity, and something close to disbelief. She walked slowly toward the side, away from the stage, her steps calm like always. But the eyes around her had changed. They followed her now, not out of curiosity anymore, but respect. The same students who had whispered before were silent. Some wanted to say something, but the words didn't come easily. She stopped near the wall, standing quietly, as if nothing unusual had happened. The teacher approached her again, this time without hesitation. There was no confusion in their expression anymore. Only one clear question. "How long have you been playing?" they asked gently. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed lowered for a moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "For a long time." The teacher nodded slowly, taking that in. "That wasn't something you just learned recently," they said. "You knew the piece completely." She gave a small nod. There was no pride in her response. No attempt to explain further. Just truth given in the simplest way. The teacher paused again. "Then why?" they asked carefully. "Did you play like that in class?" The question hung in the air. For a moment it seemed like she might not answer. But this time she didn't stay silent. "I didn't want to," she said quietly. The teacher frowned slightly, not fully understanding. "Didn't want to what?" She took a small breath. "Didn't want to play in front of people." It was a simple answer, but it didn't feel complete. The teacher could tell there was more behind it. But they didn't push. Not yet. Around them, a few students had gathered, listening without meaning to. The same ones who had doubted her now stood quietly, unsure of how to react. One of them finally spoke. "Why didn't you just say you could play?" they asked. She didn't look at them. Her answer came just as softly as before. "It's easier not to." That answer didn't fully make sense to them, but it felt real. The staff member who had seen her playing before stepped closer now. "I heard you practicing the other day," they said gently. She looked up for a brief second. There was no surprise in her face, just a quiet acknowledgement. "You play like someone who's been trained for years," they added. The teacher turned slightly surprised. "You knew?" they asked. The staff member nodded. "I didn't say anything," they replied. "It didn't feel like my place." The teacher looked back at her. Now everything was clearer. All those small moments, all those doubts, they weren't mistakes. They were choices. The teacher's voice softened. "You were hiding it." She didn't deny it. Another small nod. There was no anger in the teacher's expression. Only understanding. "Can I ask why?" they said. This time she hesitated longer. Her hands moved slightly, fingers brushing against each other, like they did when she was thinking. Then slowly she spoke. "There was someone who taught me," she said. Her voice didn't change, but there was something deeper in it now. "They wanted me to play perfectly, not just the notes. Everything." The teacher listened carefully. "What happened?" they asked gently. She looked down again. "They're not here anymore." The words were simple, but they carried weight. The room became quiet. No one asked what she meant exactly. They didn't need to. "After that," she continued softly, "I stopped playing in front of people." The teacher nodded slowly. "That must have been difficult." She didn't respond to that, but her silence said enough. For her, playing the piano wasn't just a skill. It was something connected to memory, to loss, to something she wasn't ready to face in front of others. "That's why you practiced alone," the staff member said. She nodded. "And why you held back in class," the teacher added. Another nod. For a moment no one spoke. The noise from the hall continued faintly in the background as the next performance began. But back here, everything felt still. Then the teacher smiled slightly. "You know," they said, "what you did today, that took courage." She looked up, just a little, not fully meeting their eyes, but enough to show she heard them. "You didn't just play," the teacher continued. "You showed something real." She didn't answer, but something in her expression softened. Around them, the other students began to relax. The tension faded. One of them spoke again, this time with a small smile. "That was really good." Another nodded. "Yeah, I didn't expect that." There was no teasing now. No doubt. Just honesty. She didn't react much, but she listened. And for the first time, she didn't look like she wanted to disappear. The rest of the showcase continued, but for many, the moment had already happened. Her performance stayed in their minds, replaying quietly. After the event ended, students began to leave, talking about everything they had seen. Her name came up again and again. "Did you see that? I had no idea. She was incredible." She walked out of the building later than most. The evening air was calm, the sky slowly darkening. For once, she didn't rush. Her steps were steady, her expression quiet but lighter than before. When she reached home, the house was just as silent as always. Nothing had changed there, but something inside her had. She walked into her room and stood near the corner. The keyboard was still there, covered like before. For a moment, she just looked at it. Then she stepped forward and pulled the cloth away. She sat down slowly. Her hands rested on the keys. But this time, there was no hesitation. No weight holding them back. She began to play. The same piece. But it felt different now. Not heavier. Not painful. Just free. The notes filled the room, soft and steady. Not hidden anymore. Not something to keep locked away. When she finished, she didn't rush to cover it again. She left it open. The next morning, she walked into school the same way she always had. But something was different. Students noticed her now. Some smiled. Some nodded. The teacher greeted her with a quiet understanding. Nothing dramatic. No big changes. Just small ones. Real ones. In music class, when she sat at the piano again, the room felt different. Not tense. Not doubtful. Just quiet. Waiting. The teacher gave a small nod. She placed her hands on the keys. And this time, she didn't hold back. Not anymore.